Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees. He said to the host who had invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or sisters or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back, and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be, because of their inability to repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Do nothing out of selfishness or out of vainglory, which is a word for excessive pride and conceit with someone who applies that stuff to himself, thinking how wonderful they are. Rather, humbly regard others as more important than you. Each looking out not for his own interests, but also everyone for those of others. It's a description of not leaving behind, especially people who might cause us difficulties sometimes. Sometimes there could be people who annoy us. Maybe that doesn't happen to anybody here, but that can happen. Or then somebody becomes very needy, either psychologically or physically, and it becomes a difficulty to help them. And Jesus is begging us here today, through the words of St. Paul, to be more attentive to such people. Sometimes I find it difficult when people knock at the rectory door and they're homeless, and it's difficult to deal with them sometimes because they want certain things that I don't have or I can't give, but they nevertheless keep persisting. And after a little while, you might get a little bit annoyed. However, sometimes we can find a way to help them, and it does help. But people like that, they require maintenance, and sometimes high maintenance. And St. Paul is challenging us to really look at that in ourselves. It's very interesting that we might call this self-effacing, and it's very interesting that the words in the opening prayer were about seeing the face of Jesus. And we can see in the Gospel of Mark, for example, Jesus often tells those who he healed not to tell anyone. He doesn't want people to know, not because he's hiding something, but because he wants to be in the background, so to speak. He wants to have things done not for a big splash, but simply for getting it done, even in a hidden fashion. He's more interested in the person he healed than in the acclaim it could get him for having a miracle. So he wants to keep it personal and silent. Something between him and that person. The letter to the Philippians goes on from this passage. He emptied himself and took the form of a slave. That's what Jesus did. That's Jesus' face. And sometimes it's hard to do that. It's hard to take care of people sometimes. And so we should be careful about making ourselves self-important and having more care for others that we have to watch out for. Even in the school and among friends, and sometimes the people who are most in need of us is our family members. As I was thinking about this, a person came to mind who early in my priesthood, I met this person, and she was very, very needy. She always wanted to talk to me. Sometimes she chased me down to talk about things that, it was just her wanting to talk to somebody. And so sometimes that was difficult. And one day we had a healing mass here in the church, and I was praying over her, and the thought came into my head, which is, sometimes God speaks to us by giving us a little thought, and the thought that came in it was, she's going to have a higher place than you in heaven if you keep this antics up. Excuse me, Lord. Okay. So we must be careful, because sometimes those who are most needy are the ones who are most endeared and cherished by God.
Regina Celi, letare, alleluia, qui aquam meruisti portare, alleluia, resurrexit sicut dixit, alleluia, ora pro nobis Deum, alleluia.